first come in the door and they want to invest, the first thing I always tell them is investing is a matter of perspective. And I usually start off with something like this. What do you see when you look in that picture? What was that? We've got a guy playing a saxophone. What else do you see?
Lady's face.
There's a lady's face, yeah. We're all looking at the same thing. We see different things. Investing is kind of the same way. We all have the same playing cards. It's kind of a matter of perspective as to what we do. Now, most of you are probably getting somewhat close to retirement, or not retirement, getting close to graduating, hopefully, retire at some point. So you've got a ways to go until retirement. So we're going to kind of talk about, well, how do you get from graduating to retirement? Once you graduate, that's generally the first opportunity people have to start investing. So we're going to kind of start talking about what do you invest in. The first opportunity you guys will probably have to invest is in some type of retirement plan, whether it be a 401k plan, 403b, something that your employer offers. So the first question you'll have to ask yourself is, how much should I contribute to the plan? There's a couple different ways to look at it. Just as a general number, anybody have a guess as to what percentage of your paycheck you should be investing in order to retire comfortably? Comfortably is the key word. There is no definition that meets everybody, but what percentage should you be deferring into the retirement plan over a period of 30, 35 years if you want to retire comfortably?
15%.
That's the magic number. If you can get to 15%, that's great. Where do you think most people start off?
5%.
That's a little high. Most people start off at 2 or 3. If you start off at 2 or 3%, you got a long ways to go. What I always tell people, I can't answer that number for you. Everybody has different circumstances. But if your employer offers any type of match, which most employers do, you need to at least contribute whatever they're matching. So if the employer will match up to 6%, you better be doing at least 6%. Why is that? It's free money. If you don't, it's just money wasted. So for every dollar you put in up to that percentage, it's basically 100% return on your money right then. So that is the first thing to consider. Most employers offer some type of retirement plan, so that'll be your first exposure to it. It's different now than it was 30, 40 years ago. Most 401k plans now, all the onus is on you for your retirement. When my grandpa was alive, he worked at a bakery for 20 years. He put in his time. They paid him a pension, which basically was a percentage of his pay for the rest of his life. Are there any pension plans around? Does anybody know?
Nope.
Hardly any anymore. There's a few that are still on the books. It's hard to find a pension plan anymore. So one, the company is not really set up to take care of you anymore. The second source of income that people generally get in retirement is from the government. How many of you think Social Security is going to be around when you retire? I didn't see any hands go up. So we're not counting on the government. We're not counting on the company we work for anymore. So that leaves you. So I know it's hard to kind of sign away 15% of your paycheck. Maybe you can start off with 7, 8, work your way up over time. But 15 is the magic number that you want to get to. A lot of people, hopefully you're not in college till you're 25. Not to offend anybody if you are 25 here, but most people start investing around age 25. A lot of people say, I got a lot of bills, I can't do anything right now, I'll wait a few years. So we just did a quick calculation to where you invest like $1,000 per year from age 25 to 55 versus starting at age 35. And the difference at retirement was 42%. The person who started at age 25 had 42% more assets than the person who started at 35. That can make a big difference. How many of you want to work till 60? 60 is a pretty good number. Yeah, it's not bad. If you start at 35, to get the same amount, you're probably going to have to work 72, 75. That's not a very fun retirement if you have to keep working. So that's the first thing to consider. The next thing you have to consider is, what do I invest in? Now, your 401k will probably offer you somewhere between 10, on this example I used 12, somewhere between 10 and 20 options. So then you, generally, when you sign up for the 401k plan, the employer comes in, hands you a packet and says, welcome to the 401k plan, fill this out, get back to me, and that's it. Generally, the person has no idea what they're investing in. And a lot of people confuse the terms that we're going to talk about here, asset allocation versus diversifying. How would you guys define, do you think that's the same, or do you think there's a difference? If so, what is the difference? Do we have any finance majors in here?
I would think asset allocation would be like the amount of money that you put in different areas, whereas diversifying is actually the qualitative nature of the different areas.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Most people, when they come in my office the first time and they bring their 401k statement, most of them think these two words are interchangeable. They're really not. And a lot of times they say, look, I'm diversified. I'm in 20 different funds. Well, okay, you may consider that diversified. I don't. A lot of times this is what ends up happening. You can have 20 different investment options inside the 401k. These are just a broad asset classes. So if you have 20 investment options, there's really only 10 or so out there. So generally you have multiple. What you end up with, like, let's just say you end up with 4 large value funds out of this 20. If you invest in all 4, are you really diversified? Generally not. If you were to go and look at that mutual fund, each mutual fund is made up of somewhere between 100 to 300 different stocks. If you were to compare those individual stocks, just because they're in the large value category, all 4 of those mutual funds are probably investing in the same thing. So you want to know what you're investing in. You don't want to be just picking all 20 and thinking you're good. What we generally do is we do some type of risk tolerance questionnaire to where we know what type of investor you are, whether you want to be conservative, aggressive, and then we go through and we assign a percentage to each one of these different asset classes, and then we go find the fund within the 401k plan that meets that asset allocation. Does that make sense? I know within the SBU 403B plan, because I've had some people bring in their statements, they have like 3 different large value funds, and I've had arguments with some of your professors that they think they're allocated correctly because they're in all 3 funds. No, that's diversifying in your mind. That doesn't fit either criteria for me. So we're going to look at some charts here that talk about why we should diversify, why we should choose different allocations. I know that's kind of hard to see. A lot of people think they can time the market. This percentage at the bottom is what I wanted you to see. This is what they went back and calculated your odds of timing the market correctly every time from 1926 to 93. I know that's a long time period. But if I counted those zeros correctly, that's point, and there's 420 zeros. That's a pretty small number. So why does that matter? In your 401k plan, they're going to deduct a little bit out of every paycheck. So sometimes you're going to hit the market when it's down, sometimes you're going to hit it when it's high. You're going to spread out your investments over time. You don't have to worry about timing the market. Timing the market doesn't work. I wish it did, but it really doesn't. One of the strategies that people come in and I ask them, what have you been doing? How have you picked your allocation? A lot of times they say, well, I just went back and looked what did really good last year, and that's what I put my money in. You'd be surprised how many people say that. There's other people out there who say, well, I went back and looked and whatever did really bad last year, I figure it's got to come out of that at some point. I'll just put my money in there. So here's a chart that actually shows that. It looks at these different allocations or asset classes over here. And historically, you can see what they've done over the last 15 to 20 years. I know that's hard to see, that's pretty small. But is there a pattern? Does anybody see a pattern? If you can find a pattern, you'll be a pretty rich person. There is no pattern. We don't know what the market's going to do from year to year. That's why we try to spread the assets out with those different asset allocations. The white box, if you can see the white box, that is a balanced portfolio, which means it's got a mixture of bonds and then these different types of stocks. I don't know about you. Let's just say pick a color, any color. The light blue. Do you want your portfolio to follow that light blue path? Sometimes it does really well. Other times it makes you feel sick when you open up your statement. I would rather have something that follows the white line, kind of the slow and steady approach. So picking the winners or the losers doesn't really work. Here's another example. Using that same chart, they went back and plotted in some actual figures for you to look at. This is saying if you had invested, it's $10,000 per year from 1997 through the end of 2011. If you had went back and chosen the worst performing stocks the year before, you would have made $224,000. If you went back and picked the winners, you would have come out roughly the same. But if you went back and just had some type of balanced portfolio, you would have come out with $246,000. So a little bit of a difference. It's not huge difference, I understand, but who wouldn't want to have 20,000 more in their account? I think I would. Okay, so we've talked about how much you're going to contribute, possibly how you're going to allocate that. The next big question you're going to have now is, do I do a traditional 401k or do I do a Roth 401k? There's pros and cons either way you go. And again, this is not an answer that I could just automatically pick for you. I hope I could help push you one way or the other, but it's not an answer I can pick for you. But what is the benefit, or what is a traditional 401k? How does that affect your taxes? I know we've got a few tax people in the room. What is the theory behind a traditional 401k as far as taxes go?
Isn't it tax deferred when you take it out?
Yeah, it's all tax deferred. So let's say, easy math, I like easy math. Let's say you make $10 a year. You defer one of that into the 401k plan. You're only taxed on 9. So it helps with tax savings today. That $1 then goes in and grows tax deferred until you retire. At that point in time, you pull the money out and you pay taxes at that point in whatever tax bracket you're in. The theory behind it is while you're working, you're going to be in a higher tax bracket. When you retire, in theory, you should be in a lower tax bracket. That's in theory. Again, back to the government, where do you think taxes are going, up or down? I have a feeling they're all going up. So that's a good theory. It works a lot of times. It's worked a lot better in the past. Switch over to the Roth. How does a Roth work?
The amount you put in has already been paid. You already paid the taxes, so any earnings after that,
Yeah.
no pay taxes.
You pay the tax now. It grows tax deferred over however long you work. Then when you retire, you pull the entire amount out tax free. When we went back and we ran some numbers just to see which one should I do, just as a general rule, if you have it about 7.5 years before you need the money, Roth is going to be the better way to go. It's usually about that 7.5 year crossover to where the tax deferral, or where the Roth actually catches up to the tax deferral and then passes it. So hopefully everybody in here is going to work more than 7.5 years. If you get a choice in your 401k plan, I would kind of urge you to do the Roth. Now, some people like to do mixture because we never know where taxes are going to be in the future. So maybe you could do 50-50. But Roth for your age is probably the way to go. Now, not every 401k plan offers a Roth feature, so that's something you got to think about. Most of them are starting to. That was kind of new as far as 401k plans go, about 4 to 5 years ago. So some 401k plans are still catching up. But if you have a choice, I would recommend Roth. I kind of highlighted these next two together. Most stats today say that everyone sitting in this room will change careers about 5 times. Not jobs, careers. So when you start thinking about that, most of you, if the stats today are correct, will change jobs about 15 times from the time you graduate until the time you retire. So what do you do with your old 401k plan? The first thing I think you have to think about is vesting. What does vesting mean in a 401k?
If your earnings are invested, even if you switch jobs, you still get to keep them.
It's based on how much time you put in with that employer. When the employer puts in a match on your behalf, a lot of times they build in a scale to where they want you to stay employed there. That's why they're giving you money. That's part of the incentive. If you leave before a certain period of time, then they get to keep that money. So that's one thing you need to know. If you're not 100% vested and you try to roll it over, you're not going to get the full amount. So just know that going in. What do you do with your 401k though? Any ideas what you should do with your 401k? In reality, people either leave them at the previous employer, and then you can imagine if you change jobs 2, 3, 4, 5 times, it's easy to forget that I had a 401k at my employer 10 years ago. A lot of these get lost, and we've got some people now, I still manage some 401ks, we've got some people that we can't find. So when that happens, we basically just close out their account, put it in what we call a forfeiture account. If they come back, great. If not, the employer gets to keep the money. So you don't want to leave it, but then that kind of leaves us hanging, what do we do with it? A lot of people, and it's kind of a sad stat, a lot of people end up cashing out their 401k. They'll think, oh, it's only $5 grand, something like that. That's an absolute terrible idea. Why is that? Any guesses?
Just the penalties and then paying the taxes on it.
Yeah, well, that you mentioned you got taxes. It all now counts as ordinary income because you haven't paid taxes on it. And then you have penalties built into it. The IRS says you're not supposed to touch that money until you're 59 and a half. If you do, if you touch it beforehand, we're going to take an extra 10%. So by the time you take federal tax, state tax, and now a penalty, most of the time you're looking somewhere between 35, depends on what state you're in. 35% is as a minimum. So you've worked hard for that money, the employer's put it in, maybe you've earned some of that, and now a third of it's gone. So one, why would you want to give a third to the government? I don't like giving any more to the government than what I have to give. Two, how does that affect you at the very end when you're ready to retire?
Gift-wise?
You have a lot less. We looked at that one stat at the very beginning, just from somebody waiting from 25 to 35, that makes a difference at the end of about 42%. We kind of talked about this in my class today. What is the magic number that you need to retire on? Or what should your goal be? It's a lot different today than it was for my grandparents 20 years ago, 30 years ago. In order to live comfortably in retirement, you're going to need somewhere north of $1 million probably. Inflation, taxes, everything has gone up. And you think think about if you retire at 60, most people today live until their 90s, 95. So you've got at least 30 years, maybe 35, hopefully a little bit more, for you and a spouse. $1 million over 30, 35 years is not a lot of money. So you need to start early, and you need to leave it alone. You can, whenever you change jobs, you can roll it over to an IRA that you can manage yourself. What I recommend though is you roll it over to the 401k plan that you go to. That way you know where it's at. It kind of follows you, and you don't lose track of it. And you don't pay the penalties on it. The penalties will definitely eat you alive. The other thing to think about here, this really isn't investing, but you fill it out on your form whenever you sign up for a 401k plan, because your beneficiaries, everyone know what a beneficiary is. A lot of people fill this out right out of college. They sign up for the 401k right out of college. And then they put it in a drawer or at the employer's office and they forget about it. What happens later on? Life happens. Most of you will end up getting married. You'll have kids. If you don't ever update that beneficiary form, and something happens, let me tell you a story, just kind of why I'm telling you this. I know of a gentleman who was in a 401k plan. Life was going good. He was married, had his wife signed up as a beneficiary. Life happened, no one's fault. They got divorced. He got remarried later on, somewhere down the road. He never changed his beneficiary. He ended up passing away. Who got the money? The first wife, yeah. The second wife was not happy because those two had kids together later on. So one, the kids don't get anything, and his current spouse doesn't get anything, and there's nothing anybody can do because his last legal document said that his first wife gets the money. She was very happy. Everyone else was not happy. Update this beneficiary form. It doesn't take any time to do. You can just go to your HR department, pick it up. So, just keep that in mind. All right, these are the last few topics I want to talk about. We talked about this in my class a little bit today too. How many of you do work study or do a part-time job while you're going to school? I know I did. Do you make a lot of money doing that? No, not very much. What happens to most people when they graduate and they get a nice job that's paying a nice salary? They spend it, right? What do they spend it on? Car? Yeah. Everyone generally goes out and buys a new car, which then what happens? Now you're $30,000, $40,000 in debt on top of your school bills. A lot of people go out and buy cars. We mentioned cars together. Buy houses, buy new TVs. They buy lots of new stuff. It's not really needed. I know it's nice to have new things, but you're really digging yourself in a hole later on. So if you can resist the urge to spend right away, you will be money ahead. And that kind of leads into the second point there. Everyone needs to build some type of emergency fund. Now that amount's going to be different for everybody, but let's think about that. If you really do change jobs a year down the road, I've got several buddies who have changed jobs. It's been 6 months or more before they found a new job. So the conservative side says you need to have at least a 6-month supply in cash. Don't put it somewhere that's risky. Put it in cash somewhere so that if something comes up and you need money to live on, I would rather have my emergency fund to live on than have to move back in with mom and dad. Life will happen. You need an emergency fund somewhere. Now, what that number is and how much, that's different for everybody. 6 months is a general rule. Again, put it in cash. cash is easily accessible, there's no fees or penalties built into getting that money, and whatever you put in is going to be there. The next thing, a lot of people don't think about this as an investment, but when you graduate, hopefully nobody in here has any college debt. I see a lot of smirks. A lot of people will have college debt, right? And then we just talked about you're going to go, if you're the average person, you're going to go buy a car. So now add another 30 or 40,000 in debt. You buy a house, add another 100, 150, 200,000, depends on where you live, in debt. Now you need to furnish that house. You're going to buy appliances, sometimes new carpet, paint. It starts adding up very quickly. And if you are married and something happens to you, do you really want to stick your spouse with a $400,000 to $500,000 debt right off the bat? I don't. Life insurance is a very, very cheap way, as we talked about in our class, to hedge your risk of having a big circumstance happen in life that would negatively affect your family. For most of the guys in this room, you'll be able to buy a $500,000 life insurance policy for about $300 a year. That's really not a lot of money, especially if you've got $400,000 worth of debt hanging out there. The ladies in the room, you'll be able to get the same amount for maybe $250. Yours is a lot cheaper generally. So for not a lot of money, you can protect you and your family from something major happening down the road. And again, a lot of people don't think of that as an investment, but you really need to. The last two, this is just something that I highly, highly recommend. It's easy to think about when I'm done here at SBU, no more school, no more class, no more test. I can tell you that's absolutely wrong. I take numerous tests throughout the year to keep my my license and everything up to date. Get to know your peers, the people that you're working with, people that you meet at conferences. Why is that important? If you are going to change jobs 10 to 15 times throughout your career, and you know somebody at another firm, that's a foot in the door that somebody else doesn't have. That puts you above everybody else in that application line. I still keep in touch with people that I work with. We have lunch together. We shoot emails back and forth just to stay in touch, see what's going on, and we've helped each other out find some jobs before. Second point, make yourself more valuable in that company. Most companies will offer some type of continuing education. It's free money that's sitting out there if you will go back. A lot of times they want you to have a certain degree or certain designation. If they're going to pay for it, why not do it? I'm proof of that. The first company I went to wanted me to have my license so I could be a broker. If I did not have that license, I wouldn't have been able to transfer back to my current job in Bolivar. That company paid for it. They paid for my books. They paid for my exams, which exams are not cheap. If they're going to pay for it, do it. Make yourself more marketable. Again, it comes back, if we really are going to change jobs 10 to 15 times, don't you want to be more marketable? How many of you want to have the same job 40 years from now that you're going to get when you graduate? I don't. I would go absolutely out of my mind if I had to do the same thing over and over and over for 40 years. Invest in yourself. Make yourself more valuable. And then, we talked about this in my class today. Whenever you do get that job, I know you're going to have to put in your time. You're going to be the low person on the totem pole at first. But for your sake and your family's sake, you do have to set boundaries. It's easy for the employer to say, hey, I need you to stay late tonight. I understand that, and every once in a while, that's fine. If it becomes into a 2 or 3, 4 times a week type thing, that will affect you, it'll affect your health, it'll affect your marriage, it'll affect everything down the road. Set boundaries with your employer. It's not an easy conversation to have, to go in and say, I want to do the job for you, I'm committed to your company, but look, this is all I can do. you'd be surprised how many employers will respect you for saying that. So that's one thing. The last thing I'll talk about, invest in your community. When I was going to school here, you could not have convinced me that I would be back here speaking to you guys tonight or teaching a class. I hate public speaking. But SBU gave me so much that when Dr. Lynch called and said, hey, I need a favor, okay, I'll do it. And then one of the most enriching things that I have done professionally at our firm, we started our own foundation. We wanted to give back as a firm, but we didn't want to just give money and then, okay, that's enough. So we started our own foundation, and we actually give back to our community, to the underprivileged kids in the local surrounding public schools. That is one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. When you go to the school, well, here's an example of, it's something that most people don't get to see, but kindergartners. When do kindergartners generally eat their lunch? Does anybody know? Generally 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. How many of you eat that early? I don't. And if I did, there's no way I could go till 3 o'clock and then ride the bus home for an hour before I got another snack. A lot of kindergartners, if they have an afternoon snack, it is not covered by free and reduced lunch. It's kind of a side note here, but so our foundation pays for that afternoon snack for those kindergartners. To see their faces light up whenever they come through and say, I get a snack today, I mean, that just melts your heart. Find some way to give back to your community. Not only will it help them, but it will really help you as a person to grow. So with that, I think that's it. Yeah. Any questions?
So is there a big reason for life insurance different prices for women and men?
It all comes back to mortality tables. Generally, men die quicker. Maybe because we do more stupid things. I don't know. But if you were to look at mortality tables, generally men have a lower life expectancy. So that's generally why. And kind of a side note on mortality tables, they were updated about 6 years ago. Previously, they were based on tables that were written back in the 1950s. In the 50s, people didn't live as long, so they were based on somebody living like 72. So about 6 years ago, they updated mortality tables. Now they're based on you living to 110. I don't know many people who live to 110, but I know as far as, if they're writing me, as far as rates go, if they're expecting me to live to 72 or 110, it's a lot cheaper if I'm rated at 110. That's why insurance is so cheap anymore. It's not worth going without it. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
With the life insurance, do you think it's, I guess you kind of gave the impression that we should buy it like if we're married or have kids, but I know a lot of parents have co-signed on your student loans
Yeah.
or on even like on your first car to get 0%, so that could be useful then.
Anybody and everybody needs it. Yeah. Not just when you get married. Yeah. That's a good point. If somebody else has co-signed with you on a loan and something happens to you, they will go after that person for the money. That's not a position you want to leave your parents in or your grandparents or a friend or whoever. So
There are even like funeral expenses too, and so
Yeah.
I don't know how expensive that is, but somebody would have to pick up that bill.
yeah. Yeah. It's not on here, but just as a side note too, as we're talking about schooling, I think I told my class this maybe the first or second day. If anybody in here pays, if you have to pay out of pocket for college, hopefully everybody in here has enough scholarships to cover that. Most people don't. But if you or your parents have to pay out of pocket for any type of school, whether it be books, whatever, If they're writing the check already, if you run that through a 529 account, you put it in the 529 account, put it in cash. Most of them say it has to be there for 7 days. They can then pull that money right back out, use it towards your tuition, your books, whatever, and it saves them whatever their state tax is. So Missouri is 6%. It doesn't help on federal tax, but if you can save at least 6% on your state tax, why not do it? I mean, if you're going to have to write the check anyway, why not get a deduction for it? Any other questions?